The ceremonial arena was on fire. Not literally, but close enough. Mateo pushed his mop across the polished obsidian floor, weaving between camera drones and dignitaries from star systems he couldn't pronounce. Somewhere behind him, a voice boomed through translators in 86 languages about tradition and honor and the sacred choosing of apex predator cubs. He was just trying to reach the spill in Section 9 before someone slipped and sued the station. That's when the first cub sat on his boot. Mateo froze. The cub, easily the size of a small bear, covered in midnight blue scales with eyes like molten gold, settled its considerable weight directly onto his left foot and stared up at him. Making eye contact with an apex predator was generally considered a bad idea, but Mateo was too shocked to look away. He said eloquently. A second cub padded over and sat on his right boot. No, 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 Mateo whispered, trying to shuffle backward. Wrong human. You want the scary people over there with the armor and the weapons. I just clean stuff. A third cub sat directly in front of him, blocking his escape route. Then a fourth, then 5, 6, 7 more until he was surrounded by a semicircle of the galaxy's most dangerous predator species, all staring at him with unsettling focus. On the central platform, Rexer, leader of the Apex Predator Council and owner of the most intimidating voice Mateo had ever heard, stood in full ceremonial armor, broadcasting to approximately 17 star systems. His speech about superior instinct and warrior selection died mid-sentence as he noticed the cub's defection. What is happening? Rexer said, his translator crackling with barely contained rage. In the observation deck, Elijah grabbed Elad's arm hard enough to bruise. This is impossible, he hissed. The cubs only bond once. Once in their entire lifespan. They're supposed to choose from the approved trainers. There are 5 master warriors standing right there, and the cubs are ignoring them for the human holding a mop. Elad, whose job as security officer usually involved breaking up fights and not watching interstellar incidents unfold, started laughing. Oh, this is incredible. This is the best thing that's ever happened on this station. This is a diplomatic nightmare, Elijah corrected, but his voice cracked with hysteria. Do you understand what bonding means to their culture? The chosen trainer becomes essentially sacred. There are treaties and laws, and that's Mateo. Mateo, who asked me last month if aliens have to file taxes. Down in the arena, Dravik, legendary combat instructor, veteran of 40 campaigns, mentor to champions, stepped forward with his energy blade humming. He performed an intimidating battle roar that made the entire arena's foundation shake. It was supposed to demonstrate dominance, strength, worthiness. One of the cubs yawned. Another licked Mateo's hand. Mateo dropped his mop. Dude, your breath smells like you ate a battery. The cub looked pleased with itself. Dravik's roar died into a confused wheeze. He stared at his blade, then at the cubs, then at Mateo, then back at his blade like it had personally betrayed him. In the observation deck, Zuran, the station's head xenobiologist and someone who frequently reminded everyone she had 4 advanced degrees, stood up so fast her chair fell over. The ceremony is void, she announced, her chitinous hands flying over her data pad. The human is clearly using illegal pheromones or sonic manipulation or something forbidden. This selection cannot stand. Recount, Rexer bellowed, his voice actually cracking. We demand a recount of the choosing. You can't recount instinct, someone shouted from the crowd. Watch me try, Rexer snarled. Mateo raised his hand like he was in school. Can I leave? I have to clean the filtration system before my shift ends. 6 cubs were now sleeping on his boots. He physically could not move his feet. He tugged experimentally. Nothing. He was trapped by apex predator nap time. I'm stuck, he announced to no one in particular. This is my life now. I live here. Someone bring me sandwiches. Breyer, the station's optimistic human diplomat who was rapidly running out of optimism, rushed into the arena, followed by a swarm of alien ambassadors all shouting in overlapping languages. Her smile looked like it was carved from stone and might crack at any moment. This is fine, she said through clenched teeth. Everything is culturally sensitive. We respect all traditions. This is a beautiful moment of interspecies connection and absolutely not a complete disaster that might trigger political catastrophe. Teresh, Rexer's political advisor, made a sound like a dying accordion. The apex predator homeworld just sent a priority message. They're calling humans cub thieves. They used the word thieves. Briar, that word has started wars. I just cleaned toilets, Mateo shouted, his voice echoing off the arena dome. All the cubs growled in unison. Not at Mateo, at everyone else. The sound was like thunder rolling through a canyon, and every being in the arena took an involuntary step backward. Except Mateo, who couldn't move because of the boot situation. Vorex, the ancient trainer who hadn't spoken to another living soul in 30 cycles, walked slowly into the arena. He was old enough that his scales had turned silver and his eyes had seen things that made younger warriors wake up screaming. He approached Mateo, studied him for a full minute of uncomfortable silence, then announced, "The cubs are defective." "Excuse me," Mateo said, clearly sick, possibly brain damaged. "This is not a real choice. They're confused and require medical intervention." Vorex said this while one of the cubs climbed onto Mateo's shoulder, impressive considering the cub weighed at least 40 kilograms, and fell asleep there with its tail wrapped around Mateo's neck like the world's most dangerous scarf. Another cub bit Vorex's armor when he stepped too close. "They seem pretty decisive to me," Elad called down from the observation deck, still filming everything on her personal device. "Very clear about what they want, which is apparently the janitor." "Maintenance worker," Mateo corrected miserably. "There's a difference." Zuran stormed into the arena, dragging enough scanning equipment to stock a medical facility. "If you are cheating, human, I will discover how." "Strip." "I will not strip. For scanning purposes." "Still no." The next hour involved Zuran running 14 different tests while Mateo stood there feeling like a specimen and the cubs refused to move more than 2 meters away from him. Blood samples, scent analysis, neural mapping, pheromone detection. Every test came back identical. Mateo was completely, boringly normal. Slightly elevated anxiety, mild dehydration, oppressive desire for food. Nothing that explained why the cubs treated him like he was the center of their universe. "This is impossible," Zuran muttered, checking her readouts for the 8th time. "You emit no unusual bonding signals. Your biology is entirely wrong for this. There is no scientific explanation, and I hate everything about this situation." "Cool," Mateo said. "Can I go now?" "No," Rexer said flatly. "We are not ending the ceremony until the cubs see reason." So they waited. Everyone stayed in the arena overnight because Rexer refused to admit defeat. Dignitaries slept in their seats. Camera drones went into standby mode. Briar sent approximately 40 increasingly desperate messages to Earth government. And Mateo, exhausted and overwhelmed, eventually just sat down against a wall and closed his eyes. Within seconds, all the cubs piled onto him like he was a heated bed and they were cold. They arranged themselves into a scaly, purring mountain with Mateo somewhere in the middle, and he was too tired to protest. Across the arena, Dravik stood alone on the platform, still holding his energy blade, staring at nothing. He looked like his soul had evacuated his body and wasn't coming back. Elad took a picture. She was definitely selling this footage. When morning came, everyone hoped the cubs had changed their minds overnight. Maybe it was temporary confusion. Maybe they'd wake up and remember they were supposed to choose warriors, not maintenance workers. Instead, the cubs had arranged themselves in a perfect defensive formation around Mateo. Textbook protection pattern. They wouldn't let anyone approach within 3 meters. When Vorex tried to offer them traditional training food, some kind of nutrient-rich meat that cost more per kilogram than Mateo's monthly salary, one cub accepted it, walked over to Mateo, and dropped it at his feet like a gift. Mateo was eating a protein bar from his pocket. "Thanks, buddy, but I'm good." The cub looked devastated. "Oh no, don't." "Okay, fine." Mateo took the meat. The cub's entire face brightened. Rexer called an emergency council session. All 5 rejected trainers sat in a row looking like they'd witnessed the death of their careers. Zuran presented her findings with the energy of someone who wanted to flip the table but was too professional. There is no scientific explanation, she said. Humans emit no unusual bonding signals. The cubs are healthy. I have no answers and I hate it. Teresh raised a shaking hand. Could we perhaps pretend this didn't happen? 17 star systems watched it live, Breyer said hollowly. Someone already made a meme. It's spreading. What's the meme? Mateo asked. Your face. Captioned Cub Magnet. You have your own fan forum now. Mateo put his head in his hands. I want to die. The cubs all made distressed sounds and pressed closer to him. Breyer stood up, smoothed her jacket, and dropped the bomb that ended all debate. According to Apex Predator law, your own law, the cubs have chosen. Legally, Mateo is their trainer. The council erupted into shouting. Arguments in 6 languages overlapped into chaos. Someone threw a ceremonial helmet. Teresh looked like he was praying to deities he didn't believe in. Then an elder in the back row stood up slowly. Everyone fell silent. There is, the elder said, his voice like grinding stone, a precedent from the before times. What's the before times? Mateo whispered. Nothing good, Elijah whispered back. Nothing ever good. The elder's eyes gleamed. When the choosing is disputed, we must test the human with the proving grounds. Rexer smiled for the first time. It was not a friendly smile. Perfect, he said. Mateo looked at Elijah. What's the proving grounds? Elijah pulled up his data pad, scrolled through historical records, went pale and said, the last 2 trainers who attempted it died horribly. Cool, Mateo said faintly. Cool, cool, cool. So I'm definitely going to die. The cubs growled again, but this time they sounded worried. The elder explained the proving grounds like he was describing a pleasant nature walk instead of what was clearly a death trap. When the choosing was disputed, which had happened exactly twice in recorded history, the selected trainer had to enter a hostile biodome with the cubs, survive for 3 full cycles, and demonstrate genuine bonding without technology, without backup. Just trainer, cubs, and whatever horrors the proving grounds contained. Elijah pulled up the historical records on his data pad, his face cycling through several shades of pale. Both previous disputed trainers died. One got eaten by something the report describes as incompatible with visual recording. The other just vanished. They never found remains. Cool, Mateo said, his voice somewhere between hysterical laughter and screaming. So I'm basically dead. This is how I die. Not old age, not disease, but alien bureaucracy. You can refuse, Elijah said quickly. We can fight this legally. This is abuse of power. The elder can't just. If I refuse, they take the cubs away. Mateo looked down at the cubs, who had been following this conversation with unsettling intelligence. Several had their heads cocked, watching him. Right? That's what happens. Rexer's smile was sharp enough to cut. If you refuse, you forfeit your claim and face exile for breaking the sacred choice. The cubs will be redistributed to approved trainers who aren't cowards. The cubs pressed closer to Mateo's legs, making low, unhappy sounds. Okay, Mateo said quietly. Okay, I'll do it. Mateo, no, Elijah started. I'll do it, Mateo repeated louder. When do we start? Dawn, Vorik said, looking satisfied. Prepare yourself, human. Pray to whatever weak gods your species worships. Preparation involved Dravik being legally required to give Mateo basic training, and Dravik approached this task with the enthusiasm of someone attending their own funeral. They stood in a practice arena while Dravik demonstrated combat stances, survival tactics, and predator psychology. Mateo retained absolutely none of it. Keep your center of gravity low, Dravik said. Mateo immediately tripped over his own feet. When facing multiple opponents, control the space. What does that even mean? It means, Dravik made a complicated gesture. It means don't die quickly. Super helpful. Thanks. The cubs watched from the sideline, mimicking Mateo's movements perfectly despite him doing everything wrong. When Mateo accidentally stumbled into a defensive position, the cubs flowed into formation around him. When he swung a practice weapon with terrible form, the cubs adjusted their own positions to compensate. Dravik sat down on the floor and stared at nothing. You are the worst student I've ever trained. This should not be working. Nothing about this makes sense. Story of my life? Mateo muttered, then yelped when a cub knocked him over and stood on his chest, purring. Okay, training's over. Apparently, the cubs have spoken. That evening, Elad visited Mateo's quarters where he was attempting to pack supplies. She was eating chips and radiating unhelpful energy. You're going to die, she said cheerfully. But you'll be a legend. I'll make sure of it. Speaking of which, can I have your media rights? I want to sell the story. Mateo threw a sock at her. She dodged easily. I'm serious, though. If you somehow survive, I'm producing a documentary. The Janitor who broke the galaxy or something. It'll be huge. I'm a maintenance worker. Janitor sounds better for marketing. One of the cubs, they'd been sneaking into his quarters constantly, suddenly appeared and stole the entire bag of chips. The cub brought them directly to Mateo and dropped them in his lap. Thanks, buddy, Mateo said, scratching the cub's head. At least someone's on my side. I'm on your side, Elad protested. I'm just also realistic about your chances, which are very, very low. The night before the proving grounds, Elijah tried to provide comfort via statistics. He arrived with his datapad loaded with data about bonding behavior, survival rates, and cub psychology. Look, Elijah said, showing Mateo graphs. The cubs genuinely bonded with you. The neural scans prove it. They'll protect you. You're not going in alone. That's supposed to make me feel better? Yes. The door to Mateo's quarters burst open and Zuran stormed in, her chitinous features sharp with vindication. I ran the simulation 83 times and you die in every single one. So thank you for proving that humans are as terrible as I suspected. Your failure will provide excellent research data. She stormed out before Mateo could respond. Elijah and Mateo sat in silence for a moment. She's fun at parties, Mateo finally said. She doesn't get invited to parties. They both laughed until they remembered dawn was coming, and then they just sat together while the cubs slept in various positions around the room. Neither human said anything else because there was nothing left to say. Dawn came too quickly. Mateo was transported with the cubs to a biodome the size of a small city, and the moment he saw it through the transport windows, his stomach dropped. The biodome was a nightmare of dense alien jungle, jagged rock formations, sections that glowed with bioluminescence, and areas that looked like they were on fire. Storm clouds gathered at the dome's peak, flickering with green lightning. This is how people die, Mateo said to no one. The cubs were pressed against him, alert and ready. They could sense his fear and they didn't like it. Rexer stood at the biodome entrance with the entire council and approximately 50 camera drones. The broadcast had started again. Apparently, the galaxy couldn't get enough of human gets killed by his own bad decisions. The live show. You have until 3 sunsets, Rexer announced, his voice booming across the observation deck. Survive, demonstrate your bond, or die trying. We'll retrieve your remains when it's over. You're so encouraging, Mateo muttered. Good luck, human. The door slammed shut behind them with the finality of a tomb ceiling. Mateo stood at the edge of the jungle, looking at the cubs. All of them stared back. So, he said, anyone got a plan? The cubs looked at each other, then back at him as if to say, you're the human. You figure it out, right? Great. Perfect. Within the first hour, Mateo managed to trip over a glowing vine, set off some kind of alarm plant that shrieked like a dying banshee, and attract a swarm of flying creatures that looked like piranhas with wings and extra teeth. He was scrambling backward, yelling creative combinations of curses he'd picked up from various species, when the cubs moved as a single coordinated unit. They formed a barrier between Mateo and the swarm, opened their mouths, and unleashed concentrated plasma breath that incinerated the entire swarm in 3 seconds. Mateo sat in the ash, covered in soot, staring. You guys can breathe plasma? When were you planning to mention this? The cubs looked smug. Okay, that's good. That's useful. Mateo stood up, brushed ash off his clothes, and realized something that made him feel simultaneously grateful and humiliated. You're not training with me. You're protecting me. I'm the liability here. One cub nudged his hand. He scratched its head automatically. I'm the baby, Mateo said. You adopted a human and now you have to keep me alive. This is backwards. This is so backwards. But the cubs just pressed against him, purring, and Mateo sighed and kept moving deeper into the biodome because what else could he do? The first cycle passed in a blur of near-death experiences. Mateo almost walked into quicksand. A cub yanked him back. He nearly ate a poisonous plant. A cub knocked it out of his hand. Something with too many legs tried to ambush them from above. 3 cubs turned it into charcoal. By the second night, Mateo was exhausted, bruised, and developing a complex about being the most useless member of his own team. He collapsed against a rock formation while the cubs arranged themselves into a protective circle. I'm sorry I'm so bad at this, he told them quietly. You guys deserve someone who knows what they're doing. The smallest cub, the first one who'd sat on his boot, crawled into his lap and made a soft trilling sound. Yeah, you're right, Mateo said, even though he had no idea what the sound meant. We're alive. That counts for something. He fell asleep with cubs piled around him, warm and purring. On the second night, Mateo woke to find 3 cubs missing. He heard distant roaring that made his bones vibrate. Without thinking, he followed the sound, running through the dark jungle while his brain screamed that this was stupid and suicidal. He found the 3 cubs cornered by something massive and mechanical, some kind of automated defense system that wasn't supposed to activate. All sharp edges and energy weapons, targeting the cubs with laser sights. Mateo didn't think. Thinking was a luxury he couldn't afford. He grabbed a rock and threw it at the machine while screaming, "Hey, over here, you rusty garbage disposal." The machine's targeting laser swung toward him. All 3 weapons locked onto his chest. "Oh," Mateo said, "I've made a huge mistake." The machine charged. In the observation room, Rexer stood with his claws clenched so tight they drew blood. The human should be dead. He should be dead 15 times over. Zoran checked her data pad obsessively. This is statistically impossible. He has no survival skills, no combat training. He's doing everything wrong. Maybe, Teresh said quietly. The cubs chose correctly. Rexer spun around, ready to roar, but stopped because even he wasn't sure anymore. Mateo survived the machine by running straight toward a cliff edge, sliding underneath it at the last second while it careened over. The cubs licked his face while he laughed hysterically. But Vorex announced surviving wasn't enough. Now Mateo had to prove leadership, the impossible command. Make the cubs enter a sealed chamber alone, without him, for 1 full cycle. Mateo knelt before them, voice cracking. "Please trust me. I don't want them to take you away." One by one, the cubs obeyed, moving like it physically hurt them. The smallest one looked back 3 times before finally entering. Mateo collapsed outside the chamber, sobbing. When the cycle ended and the cubs burst out, piling onto him, nearly crushing him with their weight and enthusiasm, Rexer's voice came over the speakers. "You've proven something unexpected," he admitted. Then the alarms blared. The cubs' biological parents had arrived, and they wanted answers. 5 adult apex predators landed on the station like living warships. Each one was massive, scarred, radiating lethal power. They ignored all protocols, striding into the council chamber with the confidence of creatures who'd killed gods. The lead female, acid green eyes blazing, looked directly at Mateo and growled something that translated as, "You are the soft thing that took my children." Mateo stood there holding 2 cubs while the others circled him protectively. "I didn't take them. They chose me. I've been trying to keep them safe." The adult predators moved closer. The cubs immediately formed a defensive barrier around Mateo, hissing at their own parents. Mateo's heart hammered against his ribs as the lead female leaned down and sniffed him thoroughly. He closed his eyes, waiting for teeth. Instead, she made a sound the translator rendered as acceptable. Rexer's jaw actually dropped. Vorex suddenly spoke, his ancient voice shaking. I remember now. There's a story from the before times of a trainer so bonded even the parents approved. He stared at Mateo. You're the first in 11,000 cycles. What does that mean? Mateo managed. Elijah whispered. It means you're basically their dad now. Mateo fainted. He woke on a medical bed with Elad laughing at him. Briar rushed in, talking rapidly. Good news and bad news. Good news, you're officially recognized. Bad news, you're politically important now. 17 governments want to hire you and the Cubs refuse to leave your quarters. Engineering is upset about the claw marks. Mateo groaned. I just wanted to clean air filters. Rexer entered. We need to discuss your new responsibilities, starting with the upcoming war trials. What followed was a blur. Dravik trained Mateo properly this time with grim determination. Mateo was terrible at first, constantly bruised, but the Cubs adapted to him and slowly he improved. The war trials came, a massive coliseum on the apex predator homeworld. Mateo and the Cubs faced swarms, mazes, and impossible obstacles. They survived together. Then came the trial of trust. A lethal machine targeted both Mateo and the Cubs. Mateo ran toward it, screaming, "Take me instead!" The Cubs destroyed the machine with merged plasma breath, then shielded his body with theirs. The arena erupted in applause. Vorex bowed deeply. You're not a trainer. You're a parent. That's rarer. 6 months later, Mateo had an official title he hated, diplomatic meetings he despised, and Cubs who destroyed 4 conference rooms. He snuck away from a medal ceremony to the maintenance bay with his mop. The Cubs sprawled around him, sleeping. Elad found him. You're missing your own ceremony. I know. This is better. She sat beside him. You're weird. Yeah. They sat in comfortable silence while the Cubs snored softly. Despite the chaos, the terror, the galactic fame, Mateo smiled. He was exactly where he wanted to be, with his Cubs doing something simple. Finally at peace. The galaxy could wait. He had floors to clean. The ripple effects of Mateo's accidental bonding spread across the galaxy in ways nobody anticipated. Within a cycle, the story had transformed from diplomatic incident into cultural phenomenon. Children from hundreds of species drew pictures of the human janitor surrounded by protective Cubs. Scientists published papers about cross-species bonding. Philosophers debated what it meant that the apex predators, nature's perfect killing machines, had chosen gentleness over strength. Zuran won 3 prestigious awards for her research, though she still insisted in every interview that she found the whole situation personally offensive. She also, however, began a new study on human-animal bonding patterns and quietly sent Mateo a gift on his birthday. A custom data pad with every known fact about apex predator biology. She never acknowledged sending it. Dravik opened the galaxy's first cross-species combat academy where humans and aliens trained together. He listed Mateo in the promotional materials as my most infuriating success story and proof that the universe has a sense of humor. Despite his grumbling, he visited Mateo quarterly and always brought training equipment the Cubs immediately destroyed. Vorex came out of retirement and began volunteering at an apex predator Cub sanctuary. When asked why, he said simply, I was wrong about many things. I'm too old to keep being wrong. He and Mateo exchanged messages occasionally, awkward but genuine. Rexer got re-elected to the council with the highest approval rating in apex predator history. The human incident, as it became known, somehow boosted his popularity. He never quite forgave Mateo for the humiliation, but he respected him. During public appearances, Rexer often said, "The Cubs taught us that strength isn't always teeth and claws. Sometimes it's patience. Sometimes it's love." Briar wrote a memoir titled How to Accidentally Prevent a War, a diplomat's nightmare. It became a bestseller across 9 star systems. She donated all proceeds to interspecies cultural exchange programs and retired to a quiet colony planet where nothing exciting ever happened. She sent Mateo a copy with the inscription, "Thanks for the career-defining trauma." Elad became obscenely wealthy from media sales and opened a documentary production company. Her first film, They Chose the Janitor, won multiple awards and spawned a franchise. She split the profits with Mateo, who immediately donated his share to station maintenance workers' benefits. They remained close friends, meeting regularly so she could mock his life choices while the Cubs stole her snacks. Elijah got promoted to head of xenobiological relations and became one of Earth's most influential voices in galactic politics. He and Mateo stayed friends, meeting for meals where Mateo complained about diplomatic obligations and Elijah reminded him he was living history. "You're the reason humans are taken seriously now," Elijah said once. Mateo replied, "I just wanted to fix air filters." They both laughed until the Cubs knocked over the table. The Cubs themselves grew into magnificent apex predators, each one powerful and deadly, but they never left Mateo's side. They accompanied him to every meeting, every ceremony, every mundane task. When dignitaries tried to approach Mateo with aggressive posturing, the Cubs would growl softly and the posturing stopped immediately. They destroyed property regularly, terrified station engineers, and slept in piles in Mateo's quarters every night. Other species began requesting human trainers, convinced there was something special about Earth's people. Scientific expeditions studied human-animal relationships. Earth became a hub for interspecies bonding research. Humanity's reputation shifted from those weird, clever apes to the species that apex predators chose. But Mateo mostly ignored his fame. He still carried his mop to maintenance bays when he could sneak away. He still fixed air filters, cleaned spills, and did the unglamorous work that kept stations running. The Cubs followed him everywhere, sometimes helping, often hindering, always present. On quiet nights, when ceremonies and politics finally released him, Mateo would sit in empty maintenance corridors with his Cubs sprawled around him, their breathing synchronized, their warmth surrounding him. He'd think about how his life had changed from one moment of sitting on his boots, how chaos had become family, how the galaxy's most dangerous predators had decided he was worth protecting. He never understood why they chose him. Zoran's research never found a definitive answer. Maybe there wasn't one. Maybe some bonds defied explanation, existing beyond biology and logic. What Mateo knew was simpler. He'd stumbled into belonging. He'd found family in the least expected place. And every morning when the Cubs woke him by sleeping on his chest, drooling on his pillow, and knocking over everything within reach, he smiled. Because despite everything, the fame, the responsibility, the diplomatic nightmares, he wouldn't change a single thing. The galaxy called him hero, legend, bridge builder between species. But Mateo had a better title, one that mattered more than all the official designations and fancy ceremonies combined. He was their dad and they were his Cubs. That was enough.